Welcome to the Tenkara Angler Level Line podcast. I'm Mike Agnetta, and I think we're going to have a really interesting episode tonight. The last few episodes of the podcast we've had have just been, members of the Tenkara Angler panel kind of talking back and forth about different topics, but we're going to go back to an interview format this one. We have a special guest, which I'll introduce in a minute. But first, let me introduce my two Tenkara Angler teammates. I've got Matt Sment and Bill Robichaux. How's it going, guys?
Great. Good to see everybody tonight. Excited to be here.
Yeah, good to see you. We finally got some cool weather in Wisconsin. Greetings from the banks of Trout Creek in the Driftless area.
Nice. Have you guys done any fishing lately?
I have.
Excellent.
Yesterday.
Excellent. Caught dinner, I assume?
No, well, actually, no, I released them all. But I don't want to get sidetracked, but one of my favorite streams was fantastic. 2 weeks ago, there was a massive scouring event. We had rain here. They must have gotten God knows how many inches. All the vegetation in some places within 50 feet of the creek bank is completely flattened, pointing downstream. And where I've been fishing in silt and mud for the last 5 years is down to beautiful, clean rock and gravel.
Ooh, wow.
Spectacular. Yeah.
I'm going to have to ask you offline which creek this is.
I will tell you, it was an epic, near biblical scouring event, and it's possibly been decades since you could see these rocks in the bottom of the stream. So anyway, good news. It'll be great for great improvement for the trout breeding habitat, certainly.
Awesome. Well, cool. I appreciate the update. So let me introduce our guest. Our guest today is Ari Rockland-Miller. He is one of the co-founders, keep me honest here, Ari, of the mushroomforager.com. We thought it would be really cool to potentially do a podcast on kind of the intersection of fishing and foraging. Matt and I actually met Ari at the White Mountains Tenkara campout. And Matt, you were actually midstream in conversation with Ari. And I walked up to you guys and you were exchanging ideas about foraging and all that stuff. And I come from a zero background on it. So I'm really excited to talk to you today. Ari, how are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, guys. Excited to discuss Tenkara and foraging.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a really cool opportunity. When certain seasons come around, you start seeing a lot of people like in our fishing groups start not only posting pictures of trout, but mushrooms or ramps or things like that. And I have zero experience about it. So I want to learn a lot today. So in terms of introductions, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners? Let us know a little bit about your background and, what led you to start the mushroomforager.com.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Ari Rockland-Miller, and I'm the co-founder of the Mushroom Forager LLC. My entire life, I have loved being outside and loved marveling at the diversity of wild mushrooms that I could find. I grew up in Western Massachusetts in the Pioneer Valley, so kind of the Amherst, Northampton area, but a hill town called Leverett. And we had kind of a 5-acre piece of land I grew up on. It was mostly eastern hemlock forest and a lot of mushrooms that I had no idea what they were. And my parents were not foragers. My dad was a pretty amazing gardener and still is, actually. I was just eating his heirloom tomato for lunch today. Cool. And, so he gardened but never foraged. And I just had an interest in it as a kid. I got my first mushroom hunting field guide when I was 10 years old. I kind of begged my mom to buy it for me. I still have it here with me today. In fact, I have it on the desk here, the Gary Linkoff's Audubon Guide to Wild Mushrooms. So, but as a kid, I wasn't able to confidently distinguish the deadly from the delicious, if you will. So wisely, I refrained from eating any of my finds. And it wasn't until after college, I got a job managing a forest farm called the McDaniels Nut Grove on the Cornell University campus for a little while. And there was a research project going on there led by Dr. Ken Mudge, focusing on growing shiitake mushrooms and as well as other species of gourmet mushrooms in kind of agroforestry systems outside in the Northeast, and seeing if there are ways we can get a valuable crop that can grow under a forested canopy without having to cut down the trees. So around that time, my childhood passion for mushrooms kind of blossomed, and I became kind of obsessed. And my partner, Jenna, was like, you should start a blog. And this was, maybe 2010, blogs were the thing. And
sure.
We the mushroomforager.com, just kind of as an outlet for this quirky passion. And we're excited to see that we were not the only mycophiles out there or mushroom enthusiasts. There many came out of the woodwork and kind of enjoyed reading my writing and viewing Jenna's photographs and recipes that she shared. And we started teaching workshops and leading guided forays around 2010. And it's been a fun adventure since then.
That's really cool. So what sort of services do you offer on the mushroomforager.com? If I was to go there and check it out, what would I see there? What would I find there?
Yeah, so we have a blog with an archive of 15 years of writing. I guess we kind of celebrated 15 years since we
congratulations.
Blog this year. And so there's a nice archive of my writing, all sorts of essays introducing different wild mushrooms and kind of just stories, honestly, and tales from epic adventures of edible adventures over the last 15 years, as well as our forage casts. So we have these, I have one here, these, I don't know if you can see on the screen, but
Sure.
On our website, it's much easier to see. It's a handout, and we have it online as well, featuring distinctive and delicious mushrooms that are in season at any given time. So we kind of update these as the year progresses. Back when I was just starting out, before I had kids, I was very reliable, but updating the forage cast almost every week. And now it's not every week, but I still am excited to share kind of special writing and photographs as the season progresses. I think the archive on there is really valuable. As far as services we offer, it's mostly teaching, leading kind of guided mushroom forays, where we take people on a walk through the woods and introduce the mushroom hunt safely and fruitfully, emphasizing kind of the distinctive species on the forage cast. And we teach these mushrooms at kind of a variety of venues throughout Vermont and the broader Northeast region. Once I did a talk out in Oregon, but mostly Northeast based.
Yeah.
Do kind of like environmental education centers like Audubon, Vermont, and the Green Mountain Club and things like that. And then kind of also do private forays as well for landowners or groups or clubs who are interested in having a mycological survey of their land or kind of just a tour of their property with a lens through the gourmet wild mushrooms that might lie there and how to distinguish them from the poisonous mushrooms on your land. So kind of guided forays and then just presentations as well. So we have like an online class series, which is mostly presentation based and kind of webinar based too.
Got it. That's really cool. So we met you, like I mentioned, at the White Mountains Tenkara camp out. Is fishing always something that you've done, or is that something that you've picked up recently? And how did you find Tenkara?
Yeah, great question. So I definitely have much more deeply rooted experience in foraging as compared to fishing, which actually I like that lens onto fishing because I think it gives me a bit of a fresh, I don't know, maybe it's just true of everyone, but I just never, my excitement is just like, it feels like I'm just discovering it for the first time every time. So I have this really love fishing, and it started as a kid, but it was only like totally casual. My buddy and I,
Sure.
Getting almost like a cane pole and finding a paper clip and a worm and, just fishing out of the farm pond. But I had some, early memories eating a trout that we caught and really just loving the experience with my friend. But it wasn't until I really didn't fish most of my young adult life. It wasn't until around the pandemic, maybe 2021, that I think I went fishing with my daughter. I was having a daughter. I now have two daughters. That got me out on a local pond, and I caught a really large pike on one of my first casts. And not really a big northern pike fisherman, but it was very exciting, and it kind of I wasn't much sure what to do with the teeth, and I was hooked and reinvigorated my fishing life. But that was like on a spinning rod, and it was fun. But I started to get, it just didn't really fit my active lifestyle. I'm always just kind of in the backcountry, exploring on the trail. And I just started like carrying a bucket and a spinning rod into the woods, and it was just not very practical and on these big hikes. And then someone mentioned to me, have you heard of Tenkara? And I was like, no, what is it? And the second this friend of mine described Tenkara and how it was, a fixed line, very portable telescoping rod, and you could just take it in a backpack and head into the woods. And it was like, that is exactly what I was looking for. And just the simplicity of it, didn't need to worry about tangling my long line anymore. It was just so appealing to me. And I got a couple rods like that same day and went out with my daughter. And that was 2021, I believe. And since then I've become, like I said, just pretty obsessed. So almost every day, if I can get a chance, I get out briefly on a local stream.
One of the things that I am really curious about, it's something, foraging is not anything that I've ever done. I grew up as a city boy. I kind of found fishing at a later age. So I'm not somebody that necessarily played in the woods or anything like that as a kid. So I'm curious, what's the best way, in your opinion, for somebody that's new, that has interest in, maybe when they're out Tenkara fishing, dipping their toes into, the hobby, to do it safely? I wouldn't know a mushroom here or there. Well, I think you had a phrase earlier. What's delicious or something? I forget what you said. Deadly, right?
Yeah, distancing the
Yeah.
deadly from
What's
that's
the
right.
best way that somebody can be confident, when they go out and, try it for the first time?
Yeah, it's a great question. So safety is obviously paramount in any kind of wild mushroom hunting. If you're thinking of hunting for the table, of course, it's also just fun to take pictures of mushrooms and to marvel at the different colors and shapes and sizes. But if you want to actually consider mushroom hunting for the table, safety is paramount. There are deadly mushrooms all throughout North America. So certainly I can speak with the most authority about the Northeast North America region. I live in Vermont. And we have a genus called the Amanita genus, which is quite common in our forests here. It's a mushroom genus that they all grow out of the soil and kind of a mycorrhizal association with host trees. And they're pretty drought tolerant. They're often beautiful and charismatic, but many Amanitas are poisonous, even deadly. The most notorious deadly Amanita that's implicated in mushroom hunting fatalities in this region would probably be the deadly destroying angel, Amanita bisporagera. And there's a close relative of that out west. And again, other Amanitas as well. That one is an all white mushroom that has a kind of a cup-like or swollen base that can be a little below the soil, called the volva, VOLVA. And that feature, if you see that feature, you might be in the Amanita genus. And again, the destroying angel in particular, this all white, almost glowingly beautiful mushroom that is very deadly and quite common in the region. So that's kind of the doom and gloom disclaimer. And of course, there are other deadly mushroom genuses as well, or genre, like the Cordonarius genus, the Lapiota genus. There's plenty of other Gallerina, plenty of other types of deadly mushrooms. Just noting that it's helpful to start by learning the most deadly mushrooms that are common in your region, so you can kind of know what to avoid. Of course, that's not going to be a comprehensive list. But then what I recommend in a more positive sense is to one by one learn the edibles, choose your favorites, whether it's the morel, whether it's hen of the woods or maitake it's called, or whether it's chicken of the woods or oyster mushrooms. Choose a few favorites and start by learning those select few mushrooms. Get to know them really well. Know their key ID features, their lookalikes, and almost like getting to know a new friend, just really get to know them well. And I find it's more rewarding to know a smaller list of mushrooms with certainty than it is to know a huge list without certainty. So I really recommend starting with a finite, narrow list. And again, the mushrooms on our Forage cast are a good place to start. No wild mushroom is foolproof, but some are easier than others. So we can get into at some point in this conversation which mushrooms I kind of recommend for beginners.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that question next. Go ahead, Bill. Did you have something you're going to ask?
I just say I love the name, Destroying Angel.
Yeah,
It may kill you, but you'll die with poetry in your head.
It's not vague, really. It
Sounds
really
like some
does
Nazi
kind of.
dentists I've heard of.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you. So you mentioned are there specific, and it might vary where you live in the country, but are there specific beginner friendly mushrooms that are easy to identify for somebody that's trying to get into foraging?
Totally. Yeah. So like I said, no mushroom is foolproof, but some are much more friendly for beginners than others. So a great example is Vermont's new state mushroom. Just last year, our Governor Scott signed into law that we now have a new state mushroom. It's Hericium americanum, and it's called bear's head tooth. So it's the common name. And the whole Hericium genus, Hericium, Hericium genus contains teeth. So as opposed to having gills or pores for spore distribution, you picture a portobello mushroom with gills, right? The Hericium genus has teeth. So they're kind of like toothbrush-like bristles or spines that point downward. And once you learn to recognize teeth, in the Northeast region, teeth are a pretty safe group of mushrooms. You still want to ID the individual mushroom with certainty, but it's much safer than, let's just say, for example, gilled mushrooms, because many of the deadly mushrooms in our region are actually gilled. So the bear's head tooth is covered in these white teeth. They're kind of it looks like a frozen waterfall or a collection of icicles, or I don't even know how to describe it, but it's a very unique appearance. The teeth point downward again, and it's just a white blob that's entirely composed of these beautiful teeth, kind of in a cascading pattern. So it's easier to describe with a photograph or to see it in person. There's definitely no substitute for going on a foray and in person and seeing this mushroom, but that's a very distinctive one to learn. Another good example would be the hen of the woods, or maitake, Grifola frondosa. That mushroom grows at the base of oak trees in the fall. it can be enormous. There can be many hens roosting at the base of one oak tree. So I've seen up to 7 separate large fruiting bodies at the base of one oak, kind of in a rim around the base of the tree. And so maitake is very delicious, very nutritious as well, and quite distinctive to identify. There are a couple lookalikes, but they're not too dangerous. And maitake has pores, so it has kind of a white, squishy pore layer on the underside of the fruiting body. And those pores, those white pores, combined with kind of a gray-brown fruiting body cap and a distinctive shape, make it pretty unique. There's something called the black staining polypore and Berkeley's polypore that are a little similar, but once you know you have a polypore with pores and it's at the base of an oak tree, you're well on your way toward that ID. So those are a couple examples of safer mushrooms. Another I won't get into as much detail is the hedgehog mushroom, which is in the Hydnum genus, Hydnum, Hydnum. And there are a variety of closely related species of hedgehogs, which are orange or peach on top usually, and look like a normal mushroom from on top, but underneath have teeth, kind of like the bear's head tooth. So teeth is a safer place to start.
I'm just curious, would you put, there's a mushroom here that appears about the same time as trout season. Would you put morels in one that's fairly easy to identify? Because to me, false morels do not, to my eye, look very much like a true morel. Would you put morels in a category of one that's safe for beginners to start with?
That's a good question, Bill. I would say that they're on the safer side. I would say that maybe not the safest, but I would say they're on the safer side for sure. Definitely not one of the more advanced mushrooms. As you said, there are false morels. So for beginners, you do have to make sure that your morels are fully hollow from tip to tail. That's kind of the important thing, like one hollow, contiguous interior cavity. So that's the important thing, in addition to the spongy kind of unique appearance, is to have that hollow interior cavity. So when you slice your morel stem, you get kind of a little ring left behind in the ground. And if you slice it like a cross section, there's just this beautiful kind of sparkling interior flesh, but it's fully hollow, fully empty. So you want to not eat any of the false morels in the Gyromitra genus, for example, which can have brain-like convolutions and folds on the inside. But yeah, once you learn a few key aspects and their lookalikes also in the Verpa genus, once you learn those lookalikes in the Gyromitra and Verpa genus, and you know to look for a hollow mushroom, morels are quite distinctive, I would agree. They do need to be well cooked, though. I should say that. I'll say it right now. All of the gourmet wild mushrooms should be cooked. The only exception for me, I occasionally nibble on pristine wild porcini when it's raw. Like once a year, I'll have a little nibble for fun on the trail. But in general, your wild mushrooms should be cooked for digestion and for safety. They contain thick cell walls that are broken down by the process of cooking. And morels, actually, in particular, contain some toxins raw. And in fact, there was a study published, I believe, by the CDC that found there was in Montana at a sushi restaurant some poisonings and even, I believe, some fatalities from folks eating raw or undercooked morels. So even a safe mushroom to ID, you still have to cook properly. So cook those morels well.
Not to put a scare in anybody, but I'm just curious, if you happen to eat a bad mushroom, like how much are you eating before it actually has like negative side effects? I'm sure that's up to the person's biology, but I'm just curious, like, should you be afraid of that? Like, how soon would you know, I guess?
Good question. It definitely depends on the person and the mushroom.
Yeah.
The general rule is that even one bite, in my opinion, is too much. Some people will do a spit test where they nibble on it to get to know the taste as a property of the ID and then spit it out. Maybe if you do that extremely cautiously, that theoretically is considered safe by some, but I personally don't do that. I don't recommend any kind of taste. For me, like the boundary is I don't put it in my mouth unless I'm 100% certain. And so I would say even if a couple bites, one bite could be too much when it comes to a deadly mushroom. Even a couple of fruiting bodies could potentially be deadly when you're talking about Amanita. So these amatoxins are potent toxins. So you want to just completely avoid them in your diet whatsoever. With that said, I will say I've never had even a slight issue from any wild mushrooms I've ever eaten. Never had any kind of indigestion. I get food poisoning all the time from, random, restaurant food or eating too much ice cream perhaps gets me bloated. But when it comes to wild mushrooms, I've never had any issues because I'm very cautious and very prudent. I'm not a bold forager. I want to be an old forager one day, as the old adage goes. So I like to kind of stick to the ones that I'm confident with and that I really know are compatible with my body.
So, Ari, this question of safety, if I can just jump in with a question. One place where I have the good fortune to do a fair bit of Tenkara fishing is in the Swiss Alps, because my partner Karina lives there, and it's very cool. One of her relatives he's in her canton. He's the guy paid by the Swiss government that if you're out foraging for mushrooms, you take a photo, you send him a text of it, and he will identify it for you and tell you whether it's safe or not to eat. It's just this huge resource that the Swiss government provides by paying this guy part-time to do this.
Wow.
What do you think of the safety of using things like, Google Lens or iNaturalist, things like that, to identify mushrooms and feeling confident enough with that identification to go ahead and eat them? What's your take on that?
That's a great question. So first of all, I just want to say one good news about safety before, and then I'd love to get into that question. The good news is that it's safe to touch any wild mushroom. So when you're identifying it, even if you're using Google Lens or whatever you're using, your field guide, ideally, it's safe to pick it up. And actually, it's encouraged to pick it up, observe it, look underneath, see is there any kind of features that are at the base of the soil, so get the full ID portrait. So they're safe to touch. I like to wash my hands after, but even the dangerous ones are safe to touch. And as far as the apps, my opinion, I don't personally use very many apps in life in general. I'm just kind of, I do have a smartphone, but I'm not a big app user. But I will say that I think apps are a great way to get a general sense as to what might this be. Maybe I'm in the right domain, but they never can be relied upon as the sole basis for ID of an edible mushroom. And in fact, I have a great anecdote to illustrate that. A buddy of mine, actually, who you all know through the Tenkara world, just texted me a couple days ago, and his app told him, I think it was, I guess I won't say which app, but one of these apps said that he had a chicken of the woods, and he smartly questioned that ID, that it was not. He thought, this can't be a chicken of the woods. It doesn't look right, not the right color. But the app said chicken of the woods, which is an edible mushroom. And he texted me to confirm. And I said, no, that's not a chicken of the woods. That's actually northern tooth. Turns out in that particular instance, northern tooth it's not edible because it's very tough and woody, but it is a tooth mushroom. It's a pretty safe, it's not a toxic mushroom. So in that particular scenario, if he had eaten this mushroom that the app called chicken of the woods, my friend would have been okay. But if it got the ID wrong, just to illustrate the stakes, what if it had done that with a deadly mushroom? So
yeah,
I think that the apps can be useful, but never to be relied upon for ID of an edible mushroom.
Yeah, and that's my experience with Merlin, the bird app. It has identified birds in my yard that I know are not here.
Okay.
And 99% sure I did not have a mockingbird in my backyard in Wisconsin, things like that. So that's what things like Merlin, I say, well, this is a likely thing to look at, but I need independent verification.
Exactly.
What the app's telling me is what I consider.
Totally. I'll say, as someone who teaches mushroom hunting, I might feel a little daunted if I felt like the apps were actually 100% accurate, because it's almost like the chess master competing with the AI.
Well, I think one answer for your audience is, and I think I've noticed it about Merlin, is it's almost too easy because you don't really learn the bird calls in a way. You say, well, I don't really have to learn and remember because I have Merlin always telling me what to be. So psychologically, in a way, you're not really learning it because you just can always rely on Merlin to identify it for you. You know what I mean? And I think the same thing.
I think we're making assumptions about use case here to stray into to application design theory here. I've used it to learn specific bird calls and specific species, but I use it intentionally.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think you're right, Bill. I would say probably the average user probably watches it like they would a television show. Oh, look, this bird popped up, that bird popped up, and everything. Yeah. But I think there's something to be said for intentional use as a training tool.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah, man, I've definitely learned some new bird calls from Merlin for sure. I mean, I don't mean
yeah,
just
yeah.
it's more as a precautionary note, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Exactly what you
I didn't
said.
mean this. You know, if that came out sounding confrontational at all, that wasn't the intent.
No, it's all right. No, but you're exactly right. The key thing is the intentionality behind it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No, you're exactly right.
So I kind of I want to kind of back things up like 700-800 years here for a minute.
Yeah.
And because we're talking about Tenkara in foraging here, and I want to tie this back together. And, you know, just real quick here, you know, for those who don't know the basic history of Tenkara, we know that it comes to us out of the mountains of Japan. And the records that we've read indicate that it was first practiced by nomadic bear hunting clans of hunter gatherers up in the mountains. Wow. And a good amount of that tradition from what we've read and been told, seen in interviews with modern Japanese anglers is actually gathering food, foraging along the way, and cooking a meal together. And that whole culinary and more hunter-gatherer portion of the experience is kind of part of the quote-unquote traditional Tenkara culture in the mountains of Japan. And so, like, I guess I'm wondering if you've seen any, or if you're feeling, you know, any opportunity to kind of explore that here in the U.S., or are you exploring that with your Tenkara fishing and your foraging? Like, how exactly do the two come together for you?
Yeah, I definitely appreciate you tying it back together there. So for me, yeah, it's almost like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and the parts, to be clear, are incredible on their own as well. And I appreciate you bringing the history into it, because I think that the intersection of kind of wild foods and nutrition and subsistence and just like wild ways of knowing is a huge part of the history of Tenkara, as I understand it, and just the history of our humankind's evolution on the earth. So for me, wild foods have always been something that fascinated me. That was part of what got me excited about mushroom hunting from the start. And in the context of Tenkara, while I release the majority of the fish that I catch, the value of the brook trout in particular, our native local brook trout, is kind of as a delicious food and as one of the richer sources of protein when you're in the middle of nowhere in the backcountry. That is not lost on me. And I think there's my daughters love to eat brook trout. And so I occasionally kind of bring one home for them. And it inspires them to kind of reconnect with this tradition themselves and to value the many ways the land can nourish us. So I appreciate you bringing that connection. And for me, there's also just an incredible synergy, even if you're not pursuing these activities for food. There's an incredible synergy just in the very habitats and modalities and the physical motions of the two activities. So I was just kind of, to me, it was like a natural thing of the confluence of these that would come together. Once I already was a forager and then discovered Tenkara, it was like, these just go so well together. And to know that that falls on a rich history that goes back so long before me is, I think, pretty inspiring as well.
If I may, guys, I'll share a specific example that I've come to with this. It was a couple of years ago. I was fishing some of my streams in the driftless, and it was kind of late in the season. There were like branches brushing my face, and usually, like a lot of us, I'm just so focused on the stream, and you're hunting trout, and you just don't. The whole world is just that rod and the water, and you're kind of oblivious in some ways. So I started to notice all these branches slapping my face. So I said, these are elms. These are elm trees. So last spring I started, I think it's going to be a tradition in May. I've got some streams I go to. There's quite a bit of elms. And those you don't know, at least in this part of the world, morels are commonly found around the bases of recently dead elms. So I've got this thing going where I fish in the morning and then take a little lunch break by the creek, and then I try to wet wade, or if not, I strip my waders off, and then I just spend a couple of hours in the woods looking for morels. And on a really good day, I come home with both a few trout and some morels in my creel or in my bag. So I did it for the first time this year, specifically going to streams where I thought I could find trout and then take a break from the fishing, just walk up in the woods and look for morels. And it's a lot of fun. It's pretty cool to combine those two.
Yeah.
So I'll be doing that every year, I think, in May.
Ari, do you feel that you split your time that way too, or are you? I guess my question is like, are you able to forage while Tenkara fishing?
Yeah.
Is that like you feel that you've got like the situational awareness and there's enough forage on the stream itself that you can do that all as you're going?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, first of all, what Bill just described is exactly my perfect day, essentially. Like I love combining those two activities, and sometimes it's like the way Bill described, the same habitat, the same trail, but first time fishing, and then I'm foraging on the kind of step one, step two.
Mhm.
But other times it really is, and I'd say most often for me, it's actually simultaneous. Of course, kind of it waxes and wanes depending on the conditions for each, which is it better day for fishing or for foraging. But yeah, I'm often simultaneously fishing and foraging. So there was just a good example was this July, I was fishing on a local stream and just, being aware of potential mushrooms, but more focused on catching a trout, honestly, in this particular pool.
Mhm.
And I managed to get the fish on. I'm kind of looking up, and all of a sudden I see a huge flush of chanterelles just literally right there on this mossy boulder above the pool. And I hadn't even seen them until I just kind of looked at it from a different angle, but there they were. So in that exact moment, I was kind of both catching a fish and foraging chanterelles. So it's quite organic the way they come together like that. It almost just feels serendipitous or like a gift from nature when they really coincide in that kind of a moment. And just in general, every time I go out, I'm carrying my Tenkara rod in my backpack, but I'm also carrying a bag in case I find any wild mushrooms. And
Mhm.
which kind of, I like to have some kind of intentions, like what stream am I going to, what might be there, how do I want to approach it as far as the fishing, and then also as far as the foraging, like what's on the forage cast today, what should I be targeting based on the habitat and the seasonality and the timing. So I have some kind of goals. Maybe the goal is brook trout and lion's mane, and or lion's mane is a kind of a synonym for or a close relative of the bear's head tooth, but the hericium mushrooms and some black trumpets and maybe some yellowfoot chanterelles. So I might have an idea of what's in season, let's say on a September morning, and maybe start by fishing and see if I naturally just find mushrooms along the way. If I'm not succeeding with the mushrooms, I might wander off trail a little bit until I find some mushrooms, and then kind of get back to the fishing as the stream meanders back around. So it's really like a fluid intersection of the two that is satisfying for me. Very
The cool thing is,
Very
you
cool.
sort of, in some ways, saved the day. It's interesting you're doing the podcast now because I had an experience with this last week. And when I'm fishing, I mean, I'm not an expert forager by any means, but I know a few things, and I'm just always grazing. One of my favorites is, the tender tops of nettles. You just pluck them off, roll them up in your hand, and pop them in your mouth. They're fantastic. Or, of course, watercress. These clear trout streams. I'm always picking watercress as I fish. But one I love it this time of year. Everybody keep their eyes open for. Last week I went fishing. It's actually probably the most inaccessible stream I know in the Driftless. It takes some effort to get there, and I knew that. I'd fished it 3 or 4 years ago and did quite well. So I said, all right, I'm going to make an effort to get back to this stream. So I did all this, arrange my schedule, and I got back there, and the fishing sucked. It was like my worst fishing outing ever because the creeks are still very low now, even though we've had a lot of rain in the Driftless area. I mean, you've got 2 inches of water above, 6-inch mat of weeds, and trying to find 2 hours, I didn't catch a trout. And I didn't have a take in 2 hours. It was probably my worst trout fishing outing ever. And this was going to be like the holy grail, this stream I did so good on it 3 years ago. But I thought, well, that's what it's like. And finally, after 2 hours, I gave up. And I'm hiking back to my car, and I ran into the best feral apple tree I've ever found. And there were 2 of them. I thought, cool. Somebody had a farm here 100 years ago in what's now this empty valley. And this tree was filled with these perfect, ripe red apples that tasted like a cross between, like you'd shaken cinnamon on a Honeycrisp apple or something. And what I did is I had an empty creel. I got 10 pounds of apples back to my car in my creel.
Bill.
So
Nice.
it's this cool thing of, the universe is abundant. It will always provide. Just keep our eyes open, maybe not in the way we expect. But I got 10 pounds of fantastic apples in my refrigerator and zero trout from that stream. But it was such a cool experience. And I love when I'm fishing this time of year, just keeping my eyes open for feral apple trees. Now, because if you go to like the farmer's market in Madison, you buy organic apples, it's about $1 an apple. I mean, this is fantastic free food if you find feral apple trees. So.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Well-
So I got to ask, Ari, do you have a particular recipe that, is there like a killer brook trout and mushroom recipe that we're all sleeping on that we need to know
I'm
about?
gonna lean in and not my all ears for this one.
Yeah, good question. I mean, when I cook up brook trout, it's usually pretty simple. I'll just I usually bake them in the oven at like 400 degrees for, depending on the size of the fish, 20, 25 minutes. And I'll put like herbs from our garden, like sage and sorrel. I like sorrel a lot. I also like wild wood sorrel. It's a plant I'll graze in the side of the stream. Maybe some lemon. And, I'll just bake the trout. And then, if I have mushrooms, I'll definitely integrate that in the meal. So I sometimes it's different days where I get lucky with the fish versus the mushroom finds, but sometimes I will combine the two. I'd say it goes really well with golden chanterelles, yellowfoot chanterelles, black trumpets, hedgehog mushrooms. Those are some examples of mushrooms that pair really well with brook trout. And ironically, they're found in the same habitat as well. At least here in Vermont, often these kind of mixed forests with a lot of eastern hemlock trees, and then the occasional beech tree and birch tree, and certain kind of these dark forests that harbor cold water and lots of nice mushrooms. So I think the trees really are the common denominator and the true source of these meals and these adventures. This at least the habitat that I'm most often in, where I'm finding this peak confluence of mushrooms and trout, are very wooded habitats. So I think that the common denominator between the two is healthy, thriving trees.
Very cool.
I'm curious. We mentioned a little bit about seasonality, right? And there's a lot of things that happen just in nature that kind of cue in, the fishing season. In Japan, they talk about the cherry blossoms or whatever, kind of cue in, trout season, where those anglers go out and go fish for the cherry trout or salmon, the yamame, whatever they're called, right? Are there specific types of mushrooms that are related to different times of the year? I'm totally a novice, so I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So mushroom hunting is a highly seasonal activity. I think all my favorite activities have a seasonal basis. I also love backcountry skiing. And I would say that May is a good time of year for morels, of course. So morels are the rock stars of spring mushroom hunting, the yellow morel, the black morel, the half free morel. And also in the spring, we have some wild greens as well, like wild ramps are delicious when kind of sustainably harvested.
Ostrich fern.
Yeah, ostrich fern, fiddlehead. So there's some nettles, as you said, but also some great spring wild greens too. And then June can be kind of a lull in the mushroom hunting season. Kind of weirdly, there can be chicken of the woods or oyster mushrooms out. But in June is one time where the fishing is peaking in my region. So I'm really focused more on the trout streams, and I might get lucky and find a chicken of the woods on the side of the trail, but more fishing heavy. And then July through October are a great time for mushroom hunting in most of the Northeast region that I'm most familiar with. And I would say that July and August is the time for peak summer mushrooms like golden chanterelles and black trumpets. And as we get into late August, September, the hedgehog mushroom becomes really prominent. By mid-September, we're looking at just probably the peak diversity of the whole season. So looking forward to the next few weeks really hitting my stride. I'm already starting to have a fridge filling up with the wild mushrooms and that have come in with recent rains. So porcini come in the fall, and the maitake, or the hen of the woods, the bear's head tooth, just an incredible diversity of mushrooms. And of course, September and the fall in general is also a wonderful trout fishing time. So I would say if you were going to align peak trout with peak mushrooms, the best times of year would be the mid to late May, to again align with just that early season action with the trout, and then the the morel flush with the mushrooms, and then kind of picking up again in mid to late August, September, early October, when also both activities really shine.
Let me ask you, what's the latest in the year you go out searching for mushrooms?
I'd say mid-October. Sometimes
So November, is it pretty much done by November?
Yeah, by early November, it's pretty much done in Vermont. And, I'm in the Northern Green Mountains, so the season, we have a great fall season, but it wraps up, usually by mid-October. But if you're further south, and I'd say all along the kind of the eastern seaboard, there are similar wild mushrooms, not the exact same. Of course, there are differences, but it gets more different west of the Mississippi River, and of course in different continents. But I would say if you're south of here, the season might be considerably longer. But for me here in Vermont, it kind of wraps up by mid-October. September is really just the best of the best if you get rain.
And you mentioned a few species of greens. So, like, how much non-fungal foraging, if I may invent a term, like I guess how diverse of a plate, and I'm sure this is seasonally dependent, but like how diverse of a plate are you able to put together?
Yeah, when it comes to greens, spring really is the best time for the kind of profusion of tender edible greens. They're good berries in the summer. In the summer I pick black raspberries in July, and raspberries and blackberries in August, and thimbleberries are peaking right now. But I would say when it comes to the greens, the spring is by far the best. And let's see, that we already mentioned the ramps. Ramps are probably my absolute favorite, with the caveat that they really need to be sustainably harvested. They're very slow growing and kind of slow to reclaim ground when they've been harvested. So we like to pick the leaves primarily with the scissors. And if you're going to dig the bulbs, just doing that very selectively and leaving most of the patch intact. But ramps I really love ramps. They just are so tasty, and they pair well with trout, and just beautiful when it's early spring and the whole forest floor is brown. And then you see an amazing green carpet of ramps. So the wild leeks of the ramps are a favorite. The ostrich fern fiddleheads, nettles are actually one of my favorites. I have a lot of seasonal allergies, and they seem to help with that. Nettle tea. Nettles are a good spinach substitute in any kind of recipe that calls for spinach. And then, other things as well for sure. But those are kind of I'd say the heavy hitters when it comes to the greens I forage the most. I also mentioned the wood sorrel being a little, looks like a clover, but with heart-shaped leaves, very lemony, bright flavor. A related sorrel is sheep sorrel, is also wild around here and has almost like little sheep ears on the leaves, if you will. So some of those sorrels I also enjoy picking. That's by no means an exhaustive list, but some of my favorites.
Another beautiful one I like in spring, and often it can be sort of an association with trout, or marsh marigolds, because they
those
like
are nice.
wet areas. But those you got to be careful. They're not so good. You don't eat those raw. They have to be cooked at least one change of water. But they're so beautiful early in spring, and they're usually around some kind of water. Sometimes I see them when I'm trout fishing.
Yeah, those are beautiful. We have a lot of those in the spring in Vermont as well. Beautiful yellow flower.
How preservable are mushrooms? Is that something that you can can, or is it pretty much pick them and eat them type of thing? Or is that something you can store, I guess?
Right. Yeah. So I'd say the best methods for preservation are it depends on the mushroom, on the species, but overall, dehydration, drying them is a good method, and freezing is another method. Freezing can either be done usually of sauteed mushrooms. So you want to saute them first in a fat like butter or oil, and then freeze. There are a few mushrooms that can be frozen raw directly, but usually we cook them first. And you can even, put some onions in that and with the butter mushroom mixture. So, and then when you take it out of the freezer, you put it right onto the hot pan. You don't even defrost it. So freezing is a good technique. Dehydration. Canning is possible. You got to be careful with food safety things, but pickled chanterelles are actually really yummy. I've had some delicious pickled chanterelles. So those are really good. But I'd say dehydration is probably the most universal. The one notable exception is that golden chanterelles are just not good after dehydration. It removes their vital apricot essence, their kind of apricot aroma. So don't dehydrate your chanterelles. Chanterelles you want to saute and freeze, but dehydration is great for morels, for black trumpets, for porcini in particular, the King Bolita porcini is almost even better and stronger in flavor when it's dehydrated and then reconstituted in water.
My daughter loves golden oysters. She lives in New York now, Brooklyn, and most spring she gets a vacuum sealed pack of dried golden oyster mushrooms that I dry for, and then just pop in an envelope and mail them to her.
Nice. Yeah, those are interesting. Yeah, those are not native, and they're increasingly common in the region, especially in New York and I think Pennsylvania, and they're in Vermont as well, but I haven't seen them in northern Vermont. Yeah, they produce incredibly large flushes. So yeah, they're interesting.
And for me, they're like a nice fallback when I'm not having a good day and it's not a good morel year. Usually turning up at least golden oysters, you can bring some of those home.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there are some studies suggesting they might reduce diversity of native mushrooms when they're kind of cohabitating on the same log. So it remains to be seen their kind of ecological impact. But I will say they are tasty, and once they're there, you might as well eat them.
So eat more. Help the planet. Eat more golden oyster mushrooms. Yeah.
They're invasive. Is that correct?
I think that more research is needed, but there was a recent study that suggests that they're kind of outcompeting native mushrooms in some cases, and that logs that have golden oysters in them might have fewer other species of.
I see.
So there's that potential, it seems like, and it's just kind of a relatively new thing. So maybe time will tell to what extent they spread.
I wish now that I would have connected Synapse enough to save the article, but I saw something just recently about some kind of out of control invasive mushroom species in Wisconsin. That's as far as my memory of it goes. I'll have to try to track that down.
We're not talking Last of Us, are we, Matt? I don't want to go down that route.
No, not like cordyceps type of type of mushroom, but
no, I was just going to say, just as an aside on the Last of Us topic, there's this one bizarre fungus that I've seen here in Vermont, and I kind of sent a photo to a Cornell mycologist and confirmed she had studied this species. There's like a fungus that attacks millipedes, a certain species of millipede, and it essentially like hacks their brain and makes them climb to the highest point where they then die. And you see them on top of stumps at the highest point, and their body then becomes like spore producing for the fungus. So it's this weird kind of creepy parasitism, if you will, going on there with the fungus.
Wow.
Millipede. I'm forgetting the name of the fungus. It's not edible, obviously.
I was going to say, we won't eat those.
Yeah. So basically, it's a way for the spores to move back up the tree to fruit to start the whole process over again.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So super newbie question, right? I'm fishing. I'm Tenkara fishing. I see, hey, there's some morels, right? And I want to grab them. What do I do to harvest them? Do I pull them out of the ground? Do I cut them with a knife? What do I do? How do I make sure I'm doing that right?
Yeah. Interestingly, it's actually slightly controversial to answer that question. It's a totally valid question because, of course, you got to harvest them somehow if you're going to eat them. So some people prefer to use a knife and kind of cut it at the base. Others prefer to uproot the mushroom, if you will, from the soil. And I've heard different rationale for kind of each perspective. So the mushroom is the fruiting body of the mycelium. So what you don't want to do is damage the underlying mycelium. So just being respectful of how you don't compress or compact the mycelium or rip it out of the ground. The mycelium is kind of this cobwebby stuff that's the actual organism of which the mushroom is the fruit. So it really depends on the context and whom you ask. But I would say that most importantly, just kind of respect the underlying mycelium. And what I will say is if you do uproot the mushroom entirely, you're not going to want to have a really dirty stem butt in your bag. So in some form, you're going to want to field dress the mushroom and make sure you don't have a lot of dirt that gets in there. But in many cases, just kind of a knife is a good method depending on the species. I think it also depends on the species and kind of the context. But yeah, there are different schools of thought as to whether it's better to cut or pluck the mushroom.
Interesting. Okay.
Ari, can I ask a related question about just a quick related question about harvesting morels? I learned to harvest morels is, you carrying them around in a net bag. So like you're distributing the spores as you walk through the woods. And I later read that's almost pointless because by the time we've harvested morels, they've already released most of the spores that are released anyway. And this isn't really helping morel production to carry them around in the net bag as you walk through the woods. What's your take on that tradition of doing it that way?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't do it with the golden oyster, but when it comes to morels, I would encourage it. I mean, it can't hurt, right? To spread some morel spores.
Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, so here's the thing. When you pick a mushroom, again, the ecological function of a mushroom is as a fruiting body. So it spreads spores. So if you pick it, it's best to pick a mature fruiting body that already has had a chance to spread those spores. With that said, I would say in many scenarios, I'd be curious if there was a study on morels, but in many scenarios, when I pick a mushroom, it might have spread already most of its spores if it's mature, but usually they're still producing spores. So I picked some coral tooth the other day, a Hericium coralloides, a relative of the bear's head tooth. And when I picked it, I could just see a lot of spores on the ground underneath where it was. And it seemed like it was still actively, it had already produced a ton of spores, but it did not seem to be done. It seemed to be kind of covered in spore dust. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that they're devoid of spores when you pick them, but maybe they've already dropped most of them if you are ethically harvesting and waiting for the majority of the spore release to kind of already happened before you pick it.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Cool.
So I wanted to, the question, I just back up a second. You mentioned best for harvesting, the term best as far as either knife or uprooting.
Yeah.
Is that best as far as sustainability or best as far as preserving taste or
Yeah.
what?
I think I meant ecologically, and I'm very receptive to any studies that would like conclusively demonstrate this. I've just heard such strong opinions in both camps saying either you should use a knife or you should not use a knife. That it's a little nebulous to me. But yeah, I was talking about ecologically speaking, what is best. But what I will say for table, what's clear is that you don't want to have a lot of dirt on your mushroom. So it's nice to have a little brush in the woods and cut off any dirty sections. So
that's actually a good topic. So one of the dirty secrets about Tenkara anglers is while they're drawn to the sport for the notion of simplicity, most of the ones that I know are also gearheads, right? So, they're not, it's not uncommon for a Tenkara angler to have like 12 different Tenkara rods or whatever it is, right?
Right.
So if I wanted to pick up, this part of the hobby, what kind of gear would we already mentioned a knife. I think you mentioned a mesh bag. What are things that would be helpful for me to bring out on the stream besides my rod and flies and line?
Yeah. I mean, part of the beauty of it really is a pretty minimalist and simple. So as long as you have your bag, you don't want a plastic bag. I'll say that. So a paper bag or a mesh bag, something a little breathable so you don't suffocate the mushroom. As long as you have your bag and your knife and a backpack or something to bring your water bottle in. Water is critical. I often I get so into it, so lost, if you will, in the thrill of the hunt that I can wind up running out of water, running out of food. And perhaps my best hunting is in those moments where I'm just completely in a state of flow and enter this kind of timeless zen. But then I realize like I am hungry and I'm thirsty. I gotta take care of some basic needs here. So make sure your water bottle, ideally a map or a phone that has some kind of a mapping app turned on. You don't want to get lost because when you're mushroom hunting, you can just wind up seeing a flush and you follow it where it goes and you can get pretty turned around pretty easily. One thing I love about Tenkara is that and following streams is that when you're following a stream, it's a natural artery for navigation. So I like to not get lost that way as I'm exploring the woods by following kind of the course of a stream. But yeah, definitely something for navigation, a snack. But my pack is pretty simple when I head out. It's just kind of a few flies, a rod or two, some nippers and forceps and mushroom knife, mushroom bag, and water, and I'm good to go. So I don't actually bring that much gear, but I did come back with more than I started with.
I'll just show you a bit of gear that's going around. I've seen it. I was gifted one. That's why I have one. It's this little thing. Nice. I'm holding a little packet that you can clip through your belt, and then it unfolds, and it's a little canvas foraging bag inside.
Cool. Wow, I like
that.
So
if you find some mushrooms, you can just pop this open where it hangs on your belt and put some morels and mushrooms in there. And
I love that.
Keep going. So it doesn't hold a lot, but I mean, hold pound of morels or so. Right. And then it just folds up out of the way. If you don't need it, you can just put it on your belt, fold it up like that. Have you ever seen these? Anyway, I've seen them a couple times now, and a friend of mine gave me one. So
that's cool. I'll get one of those.
Little foraging bag.
Yeah, I like that. I do something kind of similar sometimes, just with kind of a low tech method where I have these little mesh kind of. I'm not sure if they're what the material is, but they're organic jute maybe, or someone sent actually like a blog reader sent them to me once. Like, oh, check out these organic mesh foraging bags. So I have these little bags, and when I'm wearing a backpack with a hip belt, or even just with my belt, I will kind of tuck the little bag under my hip belt and have it kind of dangling off my belt in that way. And that way it's really accessible if I find something right there. But that looks like an even better method to achieve the same purposes.
And like a lot of people, I use empty onion sacks, those mesh onion sacks that onions come in.
Right.
And just shove one of those in my pocket or my creel. And that's my morel bag if I find morels.
Perfect. Black trumpets might fall through the cracks, though.
Yeah.
They're perfect for morels.
Yeah, they can sort of cut into the mushroom a little bit if you're not careful. Yeah.
Well, I think what everyone's really wondering, especially those of us in Gen X, is, are Smurfs real?
Can't tell you.
You've not encountered any?
No Smurfs on the trail?
No Smurfs yet, okay. Well, I figured if anyone had encountered Smurfs or any sort of gnome, elf, or other, mushroom-related forest creature, it would have been you.
Right. I'm still on the lookout. I did see a nice black bear the other day. It was actually one of the few times where I went out and didn't really find any mushrooms. I wasn't on a stream. It was a good hike, but it was kind of like, I didn't get my typical, my rush of the adrenaline of the hunt. And right as I'm thinking that, I see a black bear just kind of scampering up a very steep slope, and I got a pretty good view of a bear in the woods. That was kind of cool. But
I'll tell you, I'll share with you an interesting mushroom story I got from Laos. So I've worked in Laos a lot on wildlife surveys, and around the campfire, villagers told me this story. They claimed it was true that along the Lao-Vietnam border for a time, something very valuable was a wood called agar wood, and it's a particular type of wood that's very rare, and it's valued as incense in Muslim countries. And like 1 kilo of this, a villager could sell it for, got up to be like $1,000 for this stuff. So all these Vietnamese were coming across the border, searching the forests of Laos for this stuff. And these guys said, there was one group of about 10 Vietnamese guys camped out in the forest searching for this stuff, and they split up into 2 groups. And one of the groups of guys found the absolute mother lode of this agar wood, like thousands of dollars worth of this stuff. And they decided that they were going to keep it all for themselves, and they were going to kill the other 5 guys so they didn't have to share it with them. And so when they got back to camp, they opened up. A lot of these guys carry like AK-47s, they've got, and they shot the other 5 guys who were back in the camp cooking the evening meal. And they sat down, and they ate the meal, and they all died. It turns out the 5 guys in camp had figured this out. They'd learned this. And so they made a stew with poisoned mushrooms that they were going to feed to them and poison them when they got back and keep all this agar wood. But the other guy shot him, and then they sat down and ate the poisoned mushroom stew. So these villagers said they found these 10 Vietnamese dead, 5 of them from gunshots, 5 of them from eating poisoned mushroom stew, and they just sort of pieced this story together. Maybe there was 1 survivor. So on that happy note.
Quite the story.
Wow.
This is why we
took a dark turn.
Yeah, this is odd. He comes up with the good stuff.
Yeah, well, I had to balance the lightness of the Smurf and another story.
Oh, that's too good. Well,
no, that's an awesome story.
Like spy versus spy.
Yeah, it is.
Well, we've been chatting for a little bit. I don't know if any of you guys have any additional questions you wanted to ask Ari.
Ari, what's the biggest morel find you've ever had in one patch?
Oh, yeah. Wow. So some of the bigger individual morels that I've ever found actually were ironically Tenkara fishing this spring. I was on a stream, not even really thinking about mushrooms. And all of a sudden I saw these 2 enormous morels that just popped up at the base of the ash tree. And it was like, whoa, there they are. And I got this nice video of these really big morels with a beautiful waterfall in the background, the stream I was fishing. So it was a nice image to illustrate this intersection of Tenkara and foraging. But those were the individual biggest specimens. As far as the biggest find, I have to say Vermont is not as good for morels as not nearly as good as the Midwest is, for example, or the Northwest. So it's a little, the morel hunting can be tough here. But there was one time had one kind of anticlimactic find. I found hundreds of morels one day, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And then I saw a sign next to the spot, caution, arsenic in soil. So I had to dump the whole bag of morels, like the ultimate buzzkill. So that was pretty sad.
Well, apparently arsenic is good for morel production. Huh?
They like disturbed habitat. They like disturbed ground for some reason. So that's the weird thing about them. Yeah, old apple orchards. It might have been.
So you had the self-discipline to leave all of these morels untouched?
I mean, I already picked some, but once I saw that sign, it was. I don't know. I didn't really want to risk arsenic poisoning as good as the morels were, but that was a tough moment. And then there was one other time when I've had my share of great finds over the years, and some of the most special ones are just because I was with my daughter or a certain moment that was just very memorable in how it happened. But there was one time when someone came to a couple of my mushroom hunting workshops and was talking this big game about morel hunting, like, oh, I find thousands of morels every spring in Vermont. Oh, you should see it, in these spots I have. I was almost skeptical, honestly, because thousands of morels is for anywhere impressive, and for Vermont, very rare. And he actually wound up taking me out. This was a while back, but 2 years on 2 consecutive years. And he was not kidding. He took me to these spots that were just otherworldly, as far as the number and the quality of the morels. Of course, very secret spots, that I haven't even.
We'll talk later.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I haven't even returned to the spots since, because it's kind of the etiquette of, like, if he showed it to me, I'll let only go there with him, or
Sounds like fishing. Sounds a lot like fishing, right?
Yeah.
Spot burn, but it was incredible, and I was just in a state of awe the whole time at just how many morels were there. Every kind: black morels, yellow morels, half-free morels, even the lookalikes.
Really?
Everything was there.
And no Smurfs running around tending them all?
No.
Still no Smurfs.
A lot of ash trees.
One of my favorite morel finds was one morel last spring. I live 15 minutes from my local UNESCO World Heritage Site, Frank Lloyd Wright's home studio, Taliesin, and I lead tours there in the season, a couple of days a week. And last spring, I was leading this tour guide. We just came out of the house. We're on Frank Lloyd Wright's bedroom terrace, and there in like the little bed of flowers along the edge of the terrace, there was a single morel coming up. Nice. There was no tree like nearby. I thought,
nice.
God. And of course I didn't touch it. But there's just one morel coming up at Taliesin right out of Frank Lloyd Wright's bedroom off his terrace. And it was just so cool. And what was cool for me, Ari, is because I didn't touch it and I was leading tours, every other day or every third, I got to watch how long this thing lasted. Because I always wondered, you find a morel, how long will they last in the woods? A day, 2 days, 3 days, or a week. So I got to watch the whole life cycle of this one morel. And I think it lasted almost 10 days, which was encouraging. So
that's very cool. Yeah, morels, like, I'm not surprised by that story, because morels, more than almost any other mushroom, seem to have a sense of humor, or a sense of surprise, a sense of serendipity. Yeah. They're interesting, the way they can just pop up in unexpected places.
Well, cool. Well, Ari, is there anything that we didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about?
I think that was a great, really great conversation. There's so much fertile ground in this intersection of Tenkara and Foraging. I'm sure we could go on for hours, but one final thing I'll say is just the mental health benefit that I'm not a therapist. My family has a lot of therapists in it. My dad's a psychologist. I know there's some really cool.
My family has a lot of patience.
I do. But just, and I know people like Tony Parmenter and Dan Pierce and many others are doing really cool work at the intersection of Tenkara and mental health. And I'll just say, not in a formal sense, but just from my own personal experience, just that both Tenkara and Foraging are such contemplative states for me, that they really provide an outlet for anxiety and just a way to feel really at peace with the world. You enter this state of flow that I'm sure we're all familiar with in some form, where your eye is just on that fly looking for the strike, or you're surveying the landscape for the chanterelle mushrooms in a broad gaze. And there's nothing else. There's no invasive thoughts getting into your mind, no worries. And I just think that that's another real benefit of both Tenkara and Foraging, the way they inspire you to look at the landscape in a contemplative manner.
Yeah, and and for me,
Very
it's
cool.
also this, there's this, morels are so hit and miss even here. It's sort of like, I'm never going to find another one. You're out in the woods. I'm never going to find a morel. Even sometimes on a trout stream, there's this little voice in the backyard. You're never going to catch a trout here.
Right.
And then, every time you do, it's like this little miracle again. I've never tired of the experience of seeing a morel on the forest floor. It's just like this miracle. And
Right.
like, sort of, you're worthy of it. It's like the Holy Grail. I've actually found it. And then you can take it home. And same thing with the trout, especially a brook trout. Every time you catch a brook trout, it's like, God, you never tire of that miracle of these amazing fish. So, yeah, both physical and emotional nourishment for sure. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just today I caught a nice brook trout, and I was yelping for joy. Every time the rush never gets old.
Yeah.
Oh.
Or out for guys out west. Every time I go out west and catch a cutthroat, it's like, God, it's the same thing for me, Any native trout in its native place, it's this little miracle, It doesn't matter what species it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, Ari, I wanted to thank you for joining us tonight. Really enjoyed the conversation. I learned a lot personally, and I think I'm going to have, maybe a new co-hobby or whatever, the next time I go out and, with my Tenkara rod. If people wanted to reach out to you, is your website the best way, the mushroomforager.com?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So our email address is on there. It's info@themushroomforager.com. And yeah, definitely check out our website, the Mushroom Forager, and the blog, and maybe we'll see you at a future workshop.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I appreciate you joining us, Ari. Thank you so much. And for everybody else out there, hope you enjoyed this as well. Until the next time, we'll talk to you all soon.
Tight lines and full mushroom bags, everybody.
All right. Bye, everybody.